Nice swing, good form.
Am a genie.
Wars.
How is he doing that?
Have to find the butterfly man. Ooh,
These don't really work. For years now, there have been countless amounts of live-action adaptations of animated projects, and most of them have been, well...
Sounds to me like blackmail.
You're damn right it is, because, Jet, you are black and you are male.
awful. Now, there's so many reasons why they're bad, but there's one particular thing I've realized. The curse of comparison. When you remake something, it's bound to be compared to its original, because it's an established IP. If you then change the medium in which it was made, it's even more difficult to make it work. When you move between mediums, you change things. It's bound to happen, and it has to happen, because they are completely different. Animation gives you limitless possibilities to do whatever you want. It's exaggerated. You can defy physics and create anything you can think of. Live action is obviously very different.
I can see that.
Typically, things have to be more grounded, and if you do something fantastical, it takes a lot more work to sell. Otherwise, it just feels wrong and takes you out of the experience. This isn't to say one is better than the other, they're just different. If you remake the exact same story, but in live action, I feel as if it's just diminishing the animated version's existence, like it being animated isn't good enough, which I think is completely wrong. Even if you changed the story like this show did, I question what the point of making it was at all. I started thinking about this again when the latest Netflix Avatar: The Last Airbender trailer came out, because, while sure, it looks decent, it will never be even as good as the original show was, and we already have a terrible adaptation of it. So why do we keep making these? Sure, the easy answer is
Money!
but if we dig a little deeper, can we find another reason, like maybe demand? Because if no one watches, studios don't make any money. People complain about remakes of live-action movies all the time, but I see lots of fans get excited at the idea of a live-action adaptation, and I frankly don't get it. I mean, we've all seen the endless amounts of soulless live-action Disney remakes. It's like Disney themselves are even embarrassed to make animated movies anymore. I mean, they're making them almost one-to-one. Here's the same scene in both Lion Kings. Simba notices the stampede in the distance. Look at how expressive his face is. And then we zoom in while a shadow passes over him to emphasize his fear and how large the animals coming at him are. You can't do that in live action, so Simba's just standing there, looking in the distance. It looks good, it looks like a real lion, but it doesn't do the scene justice. They are focused on being way too realistic to the point of it being soulless and dull. Because of this, you also don't have as much freedom with something like character design. Look at Scar's design here. Black hair to immediately stand out from Mufasa, and green eyes to further isolate the differences, as well as a few other things like his, well, Scar. This is what he looks like in live action. He's just a lion. This is Mufasa. Do you get what I mean? The hyper-realism also affects how normal scenes play out in the film. Look at the differences between these two. The atmosphere is drab and they're using green for the background and a few other colors, yet the same scene in this live action just looks dull in comparison. It's also why something like The Little Mermaid doesn't really work. You make these characters look like this, and they immediately feel different. Various numbers also don't look and feel the same as the originals, which brings me to another problem I have with some of these live action adaptations. Where is the color? I don't understand why everything is so dull and dark, especially at night. There's hardly any color in these things. I don't know what it is, but it's a trend I've noticed in even this show as well. Like, One Piece, while actually being a pretty good adaptation of the anime, looks very washed out and dull. One Piece is super bright and colorful. It's a fantastical world, but for some reason, even these houses on the shore look completely dull. I mean, look at Speed Racer, for God's sake. This is beautiful. It's extremely vivid and stylized. Look at Scott Pilgrim. I know this isn't an anime. Just give me a second. It has a noticeable style. The emulation of video game sound effects and overlays is taken to its fullest, and I will say that One Piece's trailer for some reason does in fact look better, but I feel like it isn't vibrant enough still. I also just don't know why they even look different in the first place. Something tells me that Netflix messed up in the upload to their service or something, because this makes no sense at all. This is the exact same scene in the actual show and in the trailer. Like, what the hell happened here? But that's besides the point. So, what's the solution then? Well, I don't think there actually is one, except to just not do them in the first place. If you try to make something that was intended to be animated in live action, it just won't work, because it was never intended to be made that way. This fight from Cowboy Bebop is one of the best scenes in the entire anime, and its live action counterpart just feels dull. There are ways maybe it could have been made better, but at the end of the day, it just shouldn't have been made in the first place. The entire scene by the time you get there just feels completely different. You know what might have been interesting? A completely original story that takes place in the Cowboy Bebop world. Would people question the point? Sure, 100%. I don't think it needs to be set in that world, but you also wouldn't be tied down to the expectations of telling a similar story to this beloved masterpiece. At the end of the day, it all comes down to intent. Was it intended to be animated, or can it work in live action? Was it intended to be that way? For instance, animated Batman and how it portrays him through the night. His silhouette is 2 shades of black and just white for his eyes to shine through. This is impossible to do in live action, but you can pull off a similar kind of effect. However, it looks and feels different. The way Batman is introduced in The Batman is perfect for its medium and understands the character. You see almost nothing, but you hear him slowly coming. You know what's about to happen. These two accomplish the exact same effect in different ways, while taking advantage of the respective mediums. So, why do people like animated and live action Batman? Well, for one, they always have completely different stories with the same character. They are 2 different mediums and they serve different purposes. The Batman is a more grounded version of the character that pushes itself to the limits of live action. Animated versions of Batman have no limits and allow him to do anything. The character itself can be toned down to fit in the normal real world, we'll call it, but this doesn't apply to everything. If you take a character or a world and allow it to be animated, you have much more freedom to create a story than you would if it was live action. This is why I think we need more animated adaptations of live action material, or hell, just more original animated movies in general. Intergalactic is a movie that did not need to be animated, but I think it was way better for it. Scenes like these just wouldn't have been possible in live action without a ridiculously high budget, and even then, it wouldn't have evoked the same feeling. Star Wars Visions is a great example of how cool Star Wars would be with more stylized animation. They have some of the coolest fight scenes and just jaw-dropping visuals in these mini concept episodes. Like, just look at how beautiful this is. It just isn't something that is possible in live action. The Clone Wars has so many fantastic episodes and fight sequences too, and it's just because animation allows you to do so much more. Why do you think most of the mystical parts of Star Wars are only shown in animated form? It's just easier to pull off. Something like Attack on Titan would just never work in live action, and that's fine. It wouldn't feel the same. It wasn't meant to be live action, and that's okay. It's not that insane fight scenes are impossible to pull off in live action. I mean, you have things like Kung Fu Hustle to show you that, for lack of a better term, anime fight scenes can be done. Also, the final fight between Agent Smith and Neo in Matrix Revolutions. These are awesome, and they stretch the possibilities that can be accomplished with live action, but both of these are movies. One with a giant budget, and the other being mid-budget. While One Piece's budget is still really high per episode, like ridiculously high, which you can see being put to use, especially when you see things like Mihawk cutting ships in half, you still won't see the show doing fight scenes anywhere on the scale of the anime. This is simply because, aside from it being much more difficult, it just costs a lot of money. Which just makes me go back to questioning, what's the point? Why do almost one-to-one adaptations keep being made? You already did it once really well. Why are you doing a worser version of it? The Netflix One Piece was good. The costumes were great, the casting was nailed, especially for Luffy. The sets were beautiful, but I couldn't help myself but think I'd rather watch the anime or read the manga. Don't get me wrong, the show is good, like really good. It's what I would call a good adaptation. This is what anime adaptations should be like, but I don't know. It just didn't hit the same. Maybe it's a personal thing. I know lots of people watched it and maybe even gave the manga and anime a try because of it, which, cool, good for them. I'm glad, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to be making One Piece in live action. How are you gonna make something like Chopper work? Or Frankie? At the end of the day, I just think we shouldn't really cross mediums unless it's going to be an original story, because it gives you the full freedom of a medium that's being worked in, and since it's its own separate thing, it won't need to be compared to the other versions that already exist. And I'm not hating or anything, I really want to stress that I know a lot of these crews do hard work to make these shows and movies work as best as they can. But I can't help but personally think their hard work should go to making a new idea work. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, "Oh, we're doing this for a new generation," when remaking something. Like, no, make something new. Don't make something that already exists. No one wants an animated original trilogy. That makes no sense. Just like a live action Clone Wars would make no sense. Or a Spider-Verse. Or a Ben 10. No, that doesn't exist. Okay, just stick to the medium it was meant for and make original stories. At the end of the day, we don't need live-action animated adaptations. There's so many stories out there waiting to be told. It would really be a waste if we just retold stories that have already been masterfully done.